Hi everyone, my name is Malik Taylor. I am the host of Here Pay the Price podcast. I'm also a clinically licensed therapist in both Kansas and Missouri. I'm the author of Unbreakable Athlete, Becoming the Best Internal and Physical Athlete. Boom. I'm also a lifelong athlete myself. So we're kicking off episode one. It's taking me some time, but with the busyness of getting some sponsorships and connections going. It's been a busy week, but found some time here Friday to record this and talk about specifically what's mentioned in my book, the three phases of the athlete that I talk about. And today we'll be kind of doing some of the activities that I talk about in there. Just to make the episode a little bit longer, we're aiming for about 30, 45 minutes. So if you're an athlete, somebody that performs, somebody that may find this information useful, I would ask that you get a piece of paper, a pen, pencil, something, because you'll be able to do these activities. We're not going to be doing therapy on here. It's not what this podcast is for. It's more so to bring different experiences, different knowledge to not only myself but to you guys as well. So a lot of what we'll talk about in these episodes, it'll have something that you could kind of reflect on, something that you can do at home as you're even watching this video. Today it will just be me, just because it is something that I made as far as like the three levels, but we'll be having some guests here on the next couple of episodes. So if you need time, go get something to write with, bring it back, continue the video. Before we get into the three phases of my book, I kind of want to talk about what pay the price is. I talked about it a little bit in my intro video, but we'll talk about the meaning behind it and kind of why it was developed in the first place. By definition, obviously, PTP, pay the price podcast, or pay the price, sorry. But it is a slogan basically saying that you have to make sacrifices in order to get the the development, the skill, the whatever you're trying to achieve. Everything requires sacrifices, particularly in sports. So sacrifices meant, as I shared in the intro video, for us getting up Sunday morning, starting our workout at 8 o'clock and not being done until noon. Uh, just like with anything, you have to have sacrifice. So one of the lessons that we learned while in the few years of that PTP group was delayed gratification. Um, I was pretty undersized to play football, but I did end up getting to go to a college level experience with some potential to go overseas, but it's delayed gratification. You have to work out for months at a time to see even a little bit of growth. But I mean, also with that, we're working out for all that time. I was undersized, in my opinion, for football, so I had to find other ways to be beneficial in the football field. Um, but with that, I mean, and I talk about this in my book and in the intro video, that I had younger siblings, younger family friends and peers that were competing with me. I'm getting ready for college, and kids are in middle school and still in high school. Some not even in middle school yet, competing with me, which I think is an environment that not too many people get, where you have to compete with somebody better than you. Um, it not only sharpens your physical development, but it sharpens your mentality, your emotional capacity. There's a lot to be talked about when we talk about these PTP workouts. I'm gonna try to find some old videos, some old photos and whatnot to kind of show what we were doing, but I might have to do a deep dig for that one. But with that, I mean, obviously it's Pay the Price podcast. We learned a lot about mentality. It allowed us to kind of discover a lot of not only our limits, but our ability to like surpass limits. There wasn't even a single easy practice, but nothing was ever super structured. The coach who or the guy who ran it was my dad, but he'd throw in these random exercises. So we'd be done. We had done 2.5 hours of work, and we're thinking we're done. We're thinking we're cooling down, and then he'll point towards the hill at this park that we were at, and we're gonna go run 15, 20 of those. But when you first hear that, as a kid, as somebody whose legs are on fire, you pout, you complain, you walk over, you enter this very defeated mindset. But once you kind of get used to it and you're prepared for everything and you're able to realize that you're capable of doing so much more, all of which we learned through the PTP workouts, it doesn't even faze you. So then we carry this into the game system, whether you're playing football, basketball, water polo, golf. You're prepared for anything. You're prepared to come back from a 14-point deficit. You're prepared to go against the best player on the other team. You're prepared for the environmental factors that come into play with outdoor sports. You're prepared for anything, but it requires extra work. And that's where the pay the price concept came from. You're not going to get that sitting on the couch. You're not going to get that watching NFL games or watching the pros. You have to go out there and do it for yourself as well. So that's kind of where PTP came from. And shoot, I had free time, so I was like, hey, let me make a podcast. Let me try to talk to more athletes who share the same mentality. And that's kind of what we're going to do, is talk to a bunch of people, obviously including myself, who have paid the price to become the best version of themselves. It doesn't mean you're going to go pro every time. It doesn't mean you're going to even get to college, but you're able to develop into the best version of yourself. And it takes work. It takes work. Now we'll kind of talk about phase one, and phase one is the athlete identification. So this is something that dawned on me a little later than it was supposed to, mainly because I did this without really thinking about it too much. But when I switched over to jiu-jitsu and I started playing soccer, sports that I didn't do for my entire life, unlike football, it dawned on me that I didn't know the ins and outs of the sport and my expectations of my position and the sport itself. With football, it obviously playing for almost 2 decades, it just registered with me. I knew playing safety, I was the last line of defense on coverages, don't let anybody behind me, funnel people inside towards your help, use the sideline as your friend, all these fine detailed things, but also just the basic rules of the sports. I cannot hold people. I can't hold the receiver as the ball's in the air. I can't tug on a face mask. I can't jump off sides before the ball is snapped, right? And though it might seem like a very simplistic detail of being an athlete, you would be surprised how much people don't know their actual responsibilities and expectations to the game itself. We're not talking about expectations of, oh, I'm gonna score 10 touchdowns today. I'm gonna score 40 points on the basketball court. It's just simple expectations of how are you going to complete your job so that you can score 5 touchdowns or drop 40 points. So when we talk about expectation, we're talking about expectations both as a sport and for yourself as a team. We'll get to the self-expectations a little bit later. But Also, with the athlete identification, is like this is the groundwork for who you are as an athlete. Um, I remember my first identification of who I am as a defensive back in football came from the summer before my senior year. And if you read my book, you'll learn I had a whole coaching change. We went 0-10 my junior year, and then we made it into quarterfinals for San Diego playoffs, Division One, right? Totally big change, but it all started with this coach who kind of came in, very good knowledge, knew how to develop people, and taught us the right way to be football players. But that summer before, he had us fill out a paperwork, and he asked us like, "Hey, like, you've been playing football this long. Who are you trying to be? How can you get there?" Um, and at the time, I was a Raiders fan, and there's this DB named Namdi Asa. I might have butchered it, but then you have the Charles Woodsons and Darrell Reeveses and things like that. So then you start to get to a point where you're watching them, you're starting to mimic them and pick up on personality traits and what are they doing so special that allows them to be the athlete that they are. But then you start to pull some of these pieces into you as an athlete. So when we talk about your athlete identification, we're also talking about what kind of personality do you want to give off? What kind of skill set do you want to have? This is important because if we don't have our athlete identification, when we get down the road, when games become more emotionally charged or mentally challenging, that's when we start to see the penalties, the people getting kicked out of games, fighting with the other team, not being locked into the game, and trying to actually win. You just put yourself into a position where you are hurting yourself, your team, and even not even being able to play the game. When we get to the end of this, I'll assign stuff. But then the next part is motivations. Again, all of this is groundwork. The next phase is the developmental athlete. You're not going to be able to develop if you don't have a motivation, because sports are hard. Whether you find it easy, enjoyable, it's not always going to be a breeze. There's going to be challenging times. There's always going to be somebody better. There's always going to be a coach getting on your nerves. There's always going to be a game not being called your way. Motivations will keep us aligned to put our best foot forward and be able to reset, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, back to our best version of ourselves as an athlete. So motivations is another one, both internal and external. I talk about my motivation started super early. I was pretty hard headed and a little bit egotistical to the point where my internal motivation came from satisfaction of just being the person across the line for me. In high school, I played corner, so it's just one on one. You had to get past me to score, and my mindset was, if I beat you, you're not going anywhere. And I prided myself on that. That was my internal motivation. But then my external motivation is, I I'm the oldest of 6 total children, 4 younger brothers and a little sister, and they watch these games, right? They watch how I react to adversity, how I react to success, and my temperament. They watch all these details, and they pick up on it. So that was my external motivation, and I actually have one of my brothers on here. He's a beast of a guy. All of them are beast athletes, but it goes a long way to have both internal and internal motivations. So then another part of our athlete identification is we need to have goals. Short term, immediate, long term. Immediate goals, obviously me playing football, my immediate goal is to make sure that you get as very few yards as you can, very few catches as you can. Short term goal would be obviously a little bit on a bigger scale, like winning the game, getting a certain number of tackles, trying to get an interception. Long-term goals would be, hey, trying to get to the championship, developing these type of skills so I can get eyes put on me from the next level coaches. You want to have 3 sets of goals: immediate, short term, and long term for your athlete self. When we think long term, we don't want to think past a year. We're thinking season and off season, because we want to be able to talk about, one, what we learned during season, and two, what we developed during the off season. And we'll talk about that in our developmental athlete, but you want to set these goals now. Lastly, something to kind of think about when we're talking about our athlete identification is, what are our current strengths and weaknesses? This is important because so many athletes that I talk to, they can identify all their weaknesses. But if I ask them to identify one strength, it takes them forever. Or it's just something like, oh, my strength is, I don't know, watching from the sideline. I don't know. Something that doesn't really contribute to them as an athlete. But you want to have a good balance. You don't want too many negative, and if you have a lot of positives, great. But you want to make sure you have something to work on. Nobody is a perfect athlete. You could look at the greats, and a lot of them have very small weaknesses, but they're greats because they're able to hide their weaknesses. They develop their skills to a point where it looks like they have none. But I'm sure they do. They have something, just not that exposed as some of us, right? As I mentioned, being undersized, my weakness would be, obviously I don't have a lot of weight or power, at least just initially, but I'm very quick, fast. So those are strengths that you want to build off of, as well as just like some other internal things. I pick up on patterns super quick. I watch film. I'm able to pick things apart. These are things that we can build on so that our weaknesses are less exposed come game time, when we start to play live action and aggressive people, right? So kind of go through all those. Again, we want to be able to build this very solidly, so you want to put as many details as you can into this, because we're only going to build on this. If we have a poor athlete identification, we're going to be stumped here, and we're not going to be able to go on to phase 2. So these phases, they're not, oh, you can skip 1 to go to 2 or jump immediately to 3. You got to be able to complete phase 1, phase 2 to get to phase 3. Phase 3 being unbreakable athlete. Like I said, we'll kind of get there. So for the activity for phase 1 is what I call what we all call the CBT triangle. This I do with my clients in session, and it helps me identify kind of where their mind is at in terms of how they think about themselves, how much identification they have, how much awareness they have, and it's just something that we kind of use to kind of build, because then there's a whole second part, which we won't go over that part, but I will show you guys the first part. So for those just listening, I'm going to put a diagram up so that it's a little bit more organized, but for the sake of explaining things, I will obviously verbalize it and show it to the camera. So you kind of want to think about a triangle, right? So at the top you have your thoughts. The bottom right, you have your emotions. To the bottom left, you have your behaviors. And then coming off of behaviors, so like a second part of behaviors, you have your consequences. Now, most people hear consequences and they think negative. Sure, there's negative consequences for negative behaviors, but there's also positive consequences for positive behaviors, and that's where we want to get to, right? So in the middle of all this, you have your situation, just so we know exactly what we're talking about. Um, so for the sake of just having an example, um, I'm gonna say the example is coach just yelling at you, right? Or you know, you miss a tackle, right? You do something wrong. So we'll say miss a tackle. So my thoughts would be, you know, what did I do wrong? You kind of want to find three answers for each subject. So underneath thoughts, what did I do wrong? Should I have done blank differently? And then like early on in my career, I would always think like, oh, I am about to get subbed out. Okay. So three thoughts. What did I do wrong? Should I have done blank differently? And then I'm about to get subbed out. So then obviously then you go to the emotions. That's part two. And my emotions would be anxious, a bit irritated, um, I guess we'll just say angry with self, right? So then emotions goes over to behaviors, and a lot of times I would pace, or I would feel my heart rate increase, or body would start to get tense. So behaviors can be both internal and external. I kind of challenge you to think about both. What do you do to display your emotions, and then what do you do internally to, or what does your body do internally to communicate, hey, I'm feeling these particular emotions? So then we get to consequences, right? Now, consequences is off of the behaviors, and typically I add this part on because I want us to think about how this whole process, our thoughts have influence on us that is either going to be positive or negative. So, consequences would be not tuned into the game. I would begin second guessing myself. And obviously, people who watch me and I'm sitting there pacing, um, looking tense, they would know that I am not in the right headspace. So, just being observed. So obviously, this is a negative situation, right? And with this CBT triangle, it's a very basic layout of what all happens within seconds. So something happens, you have a thought, your emotions come up, your behaviors automatically start, whether it's internal or external, and then you're already having the consequences from your behaviors. Um, Now, when I work with athletes, we don't just stay here. Obviously, this is to build awareness, but then the flip side of this is we start from the bottom, start with consequences. Same situation, we still miss a tackle. What kind of consequences we have, then how our behaviors need to change. Our emotions can stay the same, and that's just more validation of like it's a tricky situation, it's a sucky situation. But then we get up to the thoughts of how do our thoughts need to change to have change behaviors and change consequences. So um, that's usually what I do with my clients who come into the office, and they usually talk about anxiety or overthinking, just kind of stuck in their head, right? So this is a simple way of doing it, and obviously I'll put a diagram up for those who are watching. If you're listening and you're still kind of confused about the explanation, obviously I would be too. I would take an opportunity when you can to look at the diagram in the video. So that is phase one, athlete identification. So if you have your piece of paper and a pen or pencil, go back through and list your strengths and weaknesses, your goals as an athlete, your motivations, your personality as an athlete, the expectations you have from the sport and your team. List all those things out. Think of as many as you can. If you need to, pause the video. If you think it's something that you can do later, do it. But we'll kind of build on this very quickly. Obviously, if you're working with me in a more intimate setting like an office, we go into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to have a 5-hour video. So that's the end of phase one. Now, we get into phase two, the developmental athlete. This is pretty straightforward. This is the phase in which athletes are developing, trying to get into the best version of themselves. And this is where a bulk majority of athletes get stuck or stop progressing, because it is not easy. It takes a while. But we use what we learned from our phase one and use that as a guiding system for phase two. So remember, I talked about our strengths and weaknesses. I asked you to identify role models. I asked you to identify who you are as an athlete. Developmental athlete pushes you a little bit further to identify what is it that you want to become as an athlete, personality-wise, skill-wise, off the field. How do you have boundaries? How do you communicate your needs? How do you take criticism? How do you do anything as an athlete? That is what we're doing. Most importantly, because this is working with athletes, a lot of us are focused on skill. So the activity that we'll do is focused on how do we develop a skill. But keep in mind, this still requires a healthy mindset, because you have to pick apart your weaknesses and be okay with that. Being okay that you have to develop it into a strength, or even just not a weakness anymore. In my book, I talk about these two concepts that athletes have to identify in this phase. I have to do more research, and I forgot the name of it, but there's this famous saying of, if you want to master anything, you have to spend 10,000 hours on it. If you do the math, 10,000 hours requires multiple years, every day, practicing that one skill. I remember hearing about it the first time and thinking, well, okay, T-step, which is a type of plant that DBs use in football to transition from backpedaling to sprinting as fast as they can. I remember doing it day after day after day after day. Not very well, but doing it. And in my head, I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting my hours in so I can get to 10,000, right? Very determined to get to that 10,000. Then it dawned on me that my T-step was not as great as I thought it was. So while we talk about the 10,000 hours, you have to be able to take your time to better it. Sure, you can aim for 10,000 hours. Really, the concept is, how are we developing it to become the sharpest skill that we could develop it to be. So then we tie in the second part of this, is a Japanese concept of Kaizen, right? Is that each day you get 1% better. Now, when you hear this, you're thinking, okay, 1% better, after 99 days, you're basically going to be the best athlete. It's not the case. 1% gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller each time that you do get better. But we're not developing whole skills. A whole skill is making a tackle, shooting a ball, grabbing a rebound, basically the skills that you think of, right? So then when we get to phase 2, we start to break down these skills into micro skills. So I talk about in my book breaking down a micro skill of making a tackle. My weakness was I either ran too fast to make a tackle and I would get back cut, or I would be too hesitant and then they would just run around me, right? Both problems. So when we talk about a skill, making a tackle was a little bit more difficult than I planned. The micro skill that I was not doing well was the breakdown right before I initiate contact. So if we're breaking it down, and I'm sitting here making a tackle, right? Initially, I'm going to start, and if I'm in a game, we'll just assume I'm in a game. If I'm going to break it down, is the play's going to start, and my eyes are on the lineman. So if you play DB, you know what I'm talking about. But if their heads go high, it's a pass. If they go low, and they're already in the second line of defense, it's a run. So we'll assume it's a run. I read low hat, and then my eyes glance into basically who's pulling, who's doing what, and that will let me know which direction to look. So we'll just say a normal run, every offensive lineman goes straight forward. We'll say the running back's going left, so then my eyes target him. Then my mind transitions to, okay, I need to banana this, which basically means I have to run forward while also gaining some field to the sideline, because that's where he's going. Then once I can identify where he's going, I need to lock onto a hip visually and target that hip. That's going to be my point right there. And so then from there, once I get about 5 to 3 yards, I can begin my breakdown, but I'm not completely stopping. It's a slowed, controlled sprint just to get one last read on that hip, right? And I'm aiming for the inside hip so I can put my helmet in front of him. So we go from identifying low hat, reading lineman, tracking that hip, or at least identifying the hip, banana the run, locking on that inside hip again, break down in a controlled sprint 3 to 5 yards before making the tackle, identify cut back by keeping your eyes on the hip, and then once you're within 3 yards, exploding through. So that part then breaks down to other skills. So I need to put helmet in front, all my pressure from shoulders and upper torso on that inner or the inside leg. Then I need to wrap my arms around in any formal way. Now, that simple skill that's made hundreds of times within a game got broken down into 10 plus micro skills, right? So remember I was saying the breakdown is the part I was struggling with. So to work on that, we go down to the basics. We walk through our first rep so we can get a feel for it. Then we kind of increase speed to the point of where we can identify where we're messing up. But then we slow down a little bit, get the ideal rep, continue to practice that until we get into full speed. Now, here's where the athlete counseling therapy comes in. The whole point of therapy is to align both your emotions, your thoughts, and your body, right? In order for your brain to turn off, it has to become instinctual. Your brain has to know exactly what it's doing in a comfortable sense of like it can trust the body, right? But if you're continuously messing up, you're just going to enter a state of anxiety where you're overthinking all the time, right? So when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're actually slowing it down. If you go too fast, too soon, you're just going to be hurting yourself, right? So coming back full circle, right? Before I went off on too far of a tangent, is we talk about Kaizen, the 1% better each day. We're not getting better at tackling, because if our tackling got 1% better each day, we'd be perfect or close to it pretty dang soon, which is not always the case. But getting 1% better is working on one of the micro skills to get better, feeding the bigger skill. So in the case of me making that tackle, my breakdown was the part that I was working on, and that will be my 1% better of the whole skill of my athlete self, right? Um, so mixing in our 10,000 hours with Kaizen, you will find that you are able to refine your physical skills a lot better. And if you're doing it in the proper way, kind of like what I was referring to a little bit earlier, you'll find that you're also sharpening your mental performance and the ability to turn your brain off in the times that you need it within a game. So as an athlete, there's more than just one skill that it takes to complete the expectations that we mapped out in phase one. So over the course of time, you're going to find that you're working on several skills at once, and that's okay. You can find different skills, different micro skills to work on. You know what you need to develop based on the list that you had before and kind of the feedback that you get from coaches, from game experience, practice, and everything in between. I was referring to this a little bit earlier, but I talked about turning the brain off, right? We have two parts of our athlete self, the physical and then the mental and emotional. So we'll call those two the internal, right? It's kind of why the book is called the best, becoming the best internal and physical athletes, because we have two athletes that we need to identify and work on. We talked about working on a physical skill. During that whole time, you are also working on your emotional and mental athlete. I talked about being able to turn the brain off in the sense of, if you think about all those steps to make a tackle, every single time you had to make a tackle, you're gonna be out of it. You're gonna overthink. You're gonna make more mistakes than you were before. But during practice is the proper time to sharpen that mental side, so that when you get into the game, it feels like an instinct. If you think about relying on instinct, where if somebody threw a ball at your face, you're gonna put your hand up to defend yourself. That's instinct. You don't have to think about it. Your hand just goes up. That's what we want with all of our skills. That's what we want to become the best athlete. If you look at the pros, you look at these high-level athletes, they make difficult skills look easy because it's like an instinct to them. At that point, they've done their 10,000 hours. They're continuing to sharpen it every single time they practice. They're in the right mindset to know what to work on to become the athlete they want to become. Practice becomes one of the most important elements in the developmental athlete, because that's going to be the perfect place to develop. You have to shape your environment to get the best out of you. Kind of what I was referring to earlier, as far as a lot of my younger siblings, younger family, friends, and peers during those PTP workouts had a challenging environment. They had not only the coaches getting onto them, but they had to compete with me, who was at least a couple years older and almost in my prime. So you want to, one, shape your environment. Two, you want to break down your skills so that you can work on micro skills. And then three, you want to really work on, during that time of development, being able to turn your brain off so it understands exactly what you're doing before you can even consciously think about it. You want all these to become unconscious, instinctual. Making a tackle should feel like second nature. Shooting a basketball from a certain spot, the 3-point line, should feel instinctual. It shouldn't be a very thought out process. The higher you go, the less you can rely on thought processes. You have to rely on instinct, because the game gets a lot faster. People make decisions at the snap of a finger. Things change super fast. And you can see it. If you go to a high school game, the speed of a high school game compared to a college game is very different. And college to the pros is very different in itself. So you can't be thinking. If you think, you're going to mess up more times than not, right? So part of this too is how do we get our brain to turn off? How do we get our emotions to be set so that it's not overtaking our physical athlete, which all people see. So then, even going around even more full circle is with the proper understanding of who we are as an athlete. We can't let people get underneath our skin because we know who we are. We know our goals. We know what we're doing and what's expected of us. So there's very little room for people to kind of get underneath their skin. But then two, when we talk about motivations, when we talk about knowing who we are and what's expected of us, not only from ourselves, our coaches, and the game, we have immediate and short-term goals. You're able to lock into the best version of yourself much quicker if for some reason that you get away from it. Right? So, you go into the first half of a game and you're down by a little bit or a lot, it doesn't matter. But this is where you start to see people break down. People start to get out of their athlete selves and really start to tap into other parts that either get them into trouble or deflate their ability to perform, right? And so during these times, this is like during halftime of games, in between rounds of like MMA, UFC, any dead period of any athletic event is the perfect time to check in on your internal athlete so that you can realign to become the best version of yourself. If you get too far gone, you'll find that when you're second guessing, your body's tense, you're just not performing how you're supposed to perform, and this is where you see in the college levels, even the pro levels, people get into trouble. They get kicked out of the games, they get flags thrown on them in crucial moments. They're just not the athlete that they're supposed to be to succeed in the game. So a little bit of a lengthy part of phase 2, but that is the essence of it. So the activity for that is breaking down a skill into a bunch of micro skills, just so that you can kind of understand the ins and outs of that particular skill and allow your brain to register so that it becomes more instinctual. Okay, that's phase 2. Phase 3 is the unbreakable athlete, but it is where you will find yourself being the most consistent. Okay. So both phase 1, phase 2, the development, the identification, phase 3 requires reflection. So that if you have to revert or at least refer back to phase 1, phase 2, you have the ability to do so and get to the best version of it that much quicker. You're able to bounce back from adversity really fast. You're able to keep yourself in the game from the time the whistle blows to begin the game to the very last second. You'll just find that you will continue to criticize yourself in a healthy way to get the best version of your athlete self as possible. In my book, I kind of talk about practice being tailored to the game, and this is where you will find a lot of the great athletes. Not too long ago, big UFC fan, but not too long ago, Sean O'Malley fought somebody, but he spoke about how the day before, 2 days before, he practiced his walkout. He had the music, he had the people next to him, he had the lights going, the clothes that he was going to wear. He had everything mapped out, but he's practicing it so that he didn't get too caught up in emotions and thoughts, and it didn't feel foreign to him when he did step into a big arena full of thousands of people. I shared, I think in the book or even just on social media maybe, I watched Oregon State this last year because that's where my brother played, and they were going into a stadium that's going to be super loud. Um, so all week they practiced with these giant speakers behind them playing music so they can work on nonverbal communication. So snapping the ball, uh, changing the plays, just being able to function without being able to communicate verbally at least. So you want to be able to optimize your practice environment to the game. You want a good example of this? You go to um, a jiu-jitsu gym. You can try to practice jiu-jitsu. If you're somebody that competes, you can try to practice jiu-jitsu, but all your reps within that gym, if you're at the right one, is optimized so that you can succeed in tournaments and competitions. Um, you usually have to find ways that your practice can mimic the real game situation as much as possible. One, like I said, so our emotions don't get too hyped up when we're in emotionally charged situations. But two, mentally, it doesn't even phase you. Um, Loud noises, large crowds, unexpected events, they don't phase you because you've practiced it already. You're not caught off guard. So that's kind of what the elite athletes do in phase three. Lastly, is success in the comfort zone. It's kind of odd, but working with a lot of athletes, they talk about the anxiety, the nervousness, the and in some cases fear to succeed because of the expectations that will then be placed onto them. Um, it's an interesting concept, but it's a real thing. Understandable, depending on the higher you go, the more the expectations feel heavy. But you got to find success in that comfort zone. Uh, Comfort in the success, right? Um, and that's just finding small wins throughout your day. Whether you're at practice and you caught a touchdown, find comfort in succeeding. Um, it's a easy concept, but it's not simple. Not that simple enough for it to be common sense, at least. Um, so then, obviously, like I said, the unbreakable athlete, the phase three athlete, is somebody that continues to reflect and grow, um, and has enough stability and strength and confidence in their athlete self to not be wavered by much of anything. It's a smaller amount of athletes that get to this point. Obviously, you'll see a lot of pros there, but not all the pros. Um, you'll have some college people, some college athletes. Um, but my challenge to you in this is to, if you feel like you're in phase three, be able to reflect both back to phase one and phase two and see how you can get better. But the activity that I have in my book is called the mirror test, right? And I remember doing this with a a bigger time college athlete, and obviously with the age of social media today, he was facing a lot of criticism for simple things, losing, not performing well, this, that. You hear people talk about it all the time of how social media is just roasting athletes for simple mistakes or things they can't really control. So with a mirror activity, that's what I call it. The mirror activity is I just have them sit in front of a mirror. I have them look, just stare, not for 30 seconds, 5, 10 minutes. Just look at who you are and identifying what you think about yourself. Um, this is also something that I did for myself when I decided to stop playing football. It helped me come to terms that I gave the game pretty much all that I could and was okay with leaving the game, right? But for current athletes, it's a great reminder that you're more than an athlete. When you look in the mirror, if you can look, stare at yourself, and be okay with how you performed for that week, um, how you conduct yourself, and everything in between, you're golden. Because people are going to criticize you regardless. You can win, and people are going to criticize you. People win the Super Bowl, and they get criticized for whatever. So, with the mirror activity, one, reflection, but then two, it's just a grounding activity that, okay, you're an athlete. Sure, you're facing criticism. Sure, the game didn't work out as you may have wanted it to. But at the end of the day, you're more than an athlete. You're, for my sake, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a friend, I'm a partner, I'm a therapist, right? I do other things, and those also bring joy to me. So athletes in that area are able to also turn their athlete self off and on at the snap of a finger. At the end of the day, they're okay with who they are, what they've done, and are able to enjoy other aspects of their life, so that their athlete self can recharge and not get burnt out, being too tense in the game. So if you feel like you're in that phase, or it's just something that you want to try, go in front of a mirror, put a timer for 5 to 10 minutes, and record your thoughts. Write them down. What do you notice? I notice a lot of times I'm just staring. I'm alive. I'm good. That's all I need, right? Um, so that's your activity for phase 3. Now, if you have the book, or you want the book, there's a lot more activities in there. There's a lot more exercises for you to do. There's a lot more information in there. I tried to hopefully keep this under an hour, but we'll see. Um, so that's kind of going to be the end of episode 1. I plan on having a guest on next. I don't know who just yet. I have a couple of options, but we're going to have somebody on here and share their experiences as an athlete, and again, just to provide a different experience other than my own, and give you guys something new to hear. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, go give me a thumbs up. If you could share it with somebody, tell me what you liked about it, what stood out to you. If you have criticisms as far as like what could have been done better, let me know. Like I said, there's a 10 episode pilot, and I want to make the most out of it. So if you need the book, just let me know. But I am kind of excited to hear what you guys think. This isn't usually my thing. I don't really talk this long for too much. So this is something new for me. Excited to hear feedback. Get your guys' thoughts. What kind of questions you guys have from the book, from the episode. What do you guys want to hear for future episodes? Let me know. Like I said, I want this to be engaging and fulfilling for you guys as well. So with that, I am ending episode 1. Thank you guys for listening, and like I said, can't wait to hear what you guys think. And I will see you guys in episode 2.